I kind of want to recap a little bit, kind of what we've been doing, because Pastor Jeff, we're doing this series on the Beatitudes from Matthew chapter 5, and Pastor Jeff has taken us up to this point and done a fabulous job. But I thought it'd be helpful maybe just to kind of read through that first number of verses in Matthew chapter 5 for those of you maybe who missed a week or two or 5, or maybe this is your first time here. And so we want to catch you up a little bit. And so we're going to start from Matthew chapter 5. I'm going to be reading from the New International Version. But it starts out in Matthew chapter 5. Jesus saw the crowds, and so he went up on a mountainside, and he began to teach the crowds, saying this, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart." This week's verse that we'll be talking about today, because the pure in heart, they get to see God. Blessed, he goes on to say, blessed are those who are, I'm going to have to go and look because my memory's leaving me. Blessed are those who are peacemakers. Jeff's going to talk about that next week, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for they get the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you, he says, blessed are you when people insult you or persecute you or falsely say all kinds of evil things about you because of me. In fact, rejoice, he says, throw a party, because you get heaven in the same way they treated the prophets who were before me. Now, friends, the problem with the Bible is that for a lot of us who have grown up in churches and we've attended sermon after sermon and we've been to Bible study after Bible study, is that after a while the Bible can become familiar to us. And sometimes when it becomes familiar, it can become almost boring and it loses its punch. And we say, oh yeah, the Beatitudes, I've heard those before. And sometimes it's easy to miss the point of what's going on because of the familiarity. And that's why we use in worship, we use sculpture and dance and music and poetry sometimes to help retell the story, because it can become almost mundane to us. Because 2,000 years ago, when Jesus opened his mouth for the first time on planet Earth, and he said the very things you just heard, friends, this blew their minds. They couldn't believe their ears. Do you realize the passage of Scripture that we just read is literally the centerpiece of the Christian faith? Did you know that passage, those handful of verses, are literally the launching pad for everything? They're the building blocks for everything Jesus would teach about, everything he would do. They all culminated on the cross. They culminated there. And then they are the characteristics, the life traits that his followers after him were to exhibit. Literally, this little passage of Scripture, these collection of verses, are the building blocks. They're the centerpiece of the Christian faith. Here's kind of how that works. For example, last week Jeff talked about blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. So in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said that. And then in the Sermon on the Mount, the next 3 chapters, he talked about what that means. And then he spent 3 years showing people mercy everywhere he went. People that had made horrible messes of their lives, he showed them mercy. And then in the act of giving his life on the cross, he showed the most incredible act of mercy that anyone's ever seen. And then he calls us after that to go ahead, and we are the people that share God's mercy with the rest of the world. Next week, Jeff will talk about blessed are the peacemakers. They will be called sons of God. He went on to talk about that in the next 3 chapters, and then he was an example of that for 3 years, showing people what they can do to have a restored relationship, peace between them and God. And then the cross was the ultimate peace-making event between us and our Maker. And then what? After Jesus died, we as followers become the people who share the message of this peace-making God. This collection of verses, friends, is literally the launch pad for everything Jesus would say and do and everything we are. And it all came together on the cross of Jesus Christ. This is not just a cute little collection of verses that are fun to talk about and memorize. They're significant. And so kind of what I would like to do this morning is this. I think it'd be fun for us. You guys know Kellogg's cornflakes, right? The cereal brand. A few years ago, they started to lose sales and people weren't buying their cereal for obvious reasons. It's tasteless, right? And then they came up with this marketing scheme where they said, I don't know, we'll come up with this new slogan. You remember what it was? Kellogg's Cornflakes. What? Taste them again for the first time, right? What I'd like to do this morning is I want to read this to you in such a way that maybe you can read it again for the first time. And so what I've done is I've gone ahead because after a while, sometimes the language that we use, and we hear a word like blessed, right? And we use that so many different ways. Like we say, we bow down at dinner time and somebody offers the blessing. Last week, Jeff talked about we use the word blessed as an expression, like bless their heart. When somebody gives us a gift, we say, oh, thank you for blessing me. We use that so many different ways. And the language sometimes can be misleading and we lose the impact of the story. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've translated it into language that I think makes a little more sense for this generation. And so I'm going to read, we'll call it the New JV, the New Jacques version, and I'm going to read that for you this morning. Actually, if you were to open up my Bible, you would see I've actually scribbled out like the NIV version. You can do that. And then I've written in my own translation. And let's see if we can't hear this again for the first time. But just to focus, I want you to put yourselves in a good place to receive this. So I'd like for everybody to kind of close your eyes and just absorb these words in our own language. Matthew chapter 5, when Jesus saw the crowds, he ran up on a mountain and sat down. His followers came to him and he began to teach them. And here's what he said, God's favor is with the desperate, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. God's favor is with those who are honest with their pain. They will find comfort. God's favor is with those who realize they can't do everything for themselves. They will inherit the earth. God's favor is with those who long for what's right. They will get their full filling. God's favor is with those who risk grace, and God will risk grace on them. God's favor is with the transparent and vulnerable, for they will see God. God's favor is with the selfless. They will be called sons of God. God's favor is with the spiritually oppressed. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Will you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So we're going to look today at Matthew 5:8, that one verse in there that in the NIV says what? Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And while this may seem like a cute little verse that you might want to memorize or write on your mirror or get a tattoo of or something like that, it actually packs a Mike Tyson-sized punch. And to understand the impact of Matthew 5:8, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to ask a couple of questions. Then we're going to do our historical homework. And then we're going to brace ourselves for what this verse actually means. So that's kind of the order. We're going to ask a couple of questions, do our historical homework, and brace for what this verse means. And here's why we go through that process and should go through that process every time we study the Bible. Because you and I do not get to decide what a Bible verse means. Did you know that? You've heard people say before that the Bible has as many meanings as there are readers to the Bible. Friends, throw that idea out. It is absolutely not true. Because you know that already, because that's not how communication works. When somebody communicates something, there is only one intended meaning that they are trying to convey, correct? If you sit down with your spouse and you say, okay, I want to communicate this to her, and you say your spiel to her, there is only one thing that spiel can mean. Now, she may misunderstand you. She may want that to mean something else, but that does not change the author's intended meaning. And so we're going to ask that question because we want to get at the idea of what did Jesus mean? What did he mean when he said this? And so here are the two questions we need to ask. The first question we're going to ask in a moment is this. What is this Jesus idea of pure in heart? It's like pure in heart, does it mean like those who are sinless, those who don't screw up, those who haven't made a mess of their lives, they get to see God. Is that what it's talking about? Or maybe is it like a certain kind of purity? Maybe like it's only sexual purity. Or does it mean, blessed are those whose heart is in the right place? So we need to ask that question. What is this idea of pure in heart? And the second question is this. What was Jesus getting at? Like whoever those pure in heart people are, that they get to see God. What's this see God idea? Like, do we get to see God now? Or is that something that happens later? Or do we get like maybe a vision? Do we have visions of God? Does it mean, or is it like a metaphor that means like the holier I am now on earth, the better I live my life, the more spiritual clarity I have? Like what is this idea of see God? Because I got to tell you, I've read my Bible. And I know, for example, I don't know if you're aware of this, but you remember the story in Exodus chapter 33, verse 20? Where Moses is talking and he's having a conversation with God, and God has this task he wants Moses to do, and Moses is not so sure he wants to do it. And so he says, God, how will I know you'll be with me? And God says, you can trust me. I'll go with you. And then Moses says, God, here's what I want you to do. I want you to show me your glory. In Exodus 33:20, you know what Moses says? He says that to God, and God says to Moses, okay, Moses, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pass in front of you, but I cannot let you. You can only see the backside of me, because anyone who sees the face of God will die. You cannot live and see the face of God. It's just an impossibility. 1 John 1:24 says this, that no one has ever seen God. And so or 1 John 1:12, so I read those verses, and I go, okay, which one of them is true? Blessed are the pure in heart, they will see God, or no one ever gets to see God. Like, is this a contradiction in the Bible? And so we need to figure out what this idea is of seeing God. Those are the two questions we're asking today. And so we're going to ask the first question, what is Jesus getting at? What's this idea of pure in heart? Because remember, we don't get to decide the meaning for ourselves. By the way, when I teach my Dive Into the Bible class, the question I tell Bible study students every time they open up the Word of God that they need to ask is this: what is the aim of Bible study? And that aim is in an acronym, AIM, which stands for what is the author's intended meaning? What is the thing that this person who said that all those years ago is trying to convey? And so that's what we're asking. And if you were to study the language that Jesus uses in this verse in Matthew 5:8, the idea that he's getting at, what the language conveys, is an idea called, it's about location. Because the noun he uses determines, folks, the region in which purity is found. Purity comes not from an area outside of your body. Nothing outward that we do can make us pure. It's not anything about a ceremony. It's not a ritual we do. You can't scrub yourself clean on the outside and become pure. And remember this. The Jews were masters at becoming pure on the outside. They had ceremony after ceremony and ritual. They had sacrifices that they would do, and they had ceremonial cleanliness and uncleanliness. They were masters at this. It was a major deal to them, and Jesus comes along and says, listen, you can scrub yourself up all you like. You can check off all your lists. You can do everything right on the outside, give a bunch of money to your church. You can do all that stuff, all the right things, and miss the point. Because purity comes from a location inside of you, this part of you called the heart. This was a major theme for Jesus. Did you know Jesus reserved his harshest words for people who missed this point? Jesus reserved his harshest words for people who were consumed about how they appeared to people on the outside, how they appeared to the world around them. Jesus had his harshest words for them. In Matthew 23:27, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees and about the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And they kind of were like the pastors and the deacons and the elders of our day and age, right? And he was so frustrated with them. He says in Matthew 23:27, he says, you guys are like whitewashed tombs. He says, in other words, you're like these tombstones that have been polished and scrubbed clean, and they're shiny and they look great, but we all know it's a dead body in there. It's full of death and decay on the outside. He says, you obsess so much about what you look and how other people think about you and how you are perceived by the world that you're neglecting cleaning what really matters. In Luke chapter 11, Jesus sits down to eat at a Pharisee's house, right? And here's how it goes down. There's a bunch of people there. Here's what he does. He walks in, he has a seat, he sits down, and he rips open the bread and starts eating. And everybody in the room gasped. You know why? My wife would have been there gasping too. He didn't wash his hands before he ate. But they were upset not because of the germs thing. They were upset because for them that was a big no-no. He was now ceremonially unclean. So they're all looking at him going, you didn't wash your hands. And Jesus, the Bible says, read their thoughts and answered them. And he said, you guys get so concerned that the cup is clean and the bowl is clean and the fork is clean and you scrub the outsides of your body. And all the while, you're neglecting the fact that your heart is a mess. You're dirty where it matters the most. And so when Jesus says that God's favor is with the pure in heart, what he's saying is this: location, location, location. Purity does not come from what you look like on the outside, what you do for everyone else to see. Purity comes from the deepest part of you. It stems from this part of you known as the heart, the part of you that determines your desires. So while you and I walk around and we're impressed by people that have numbers and letters in front of their names and a long list of achievements, and they have military ranks and big bank accounts, Jesus sees right through all that stuff and sees a person for who they really are. So let me ask you this: how pure is your heart? How desperate are you for Jesus? How much do you crave him? How much do you desire and pursue him? How deep does your longing for him go? Because when God sits down, he does an evaluation with an individual. When you get your end of the life report card, the only thing he looks at is the heart. And he can spot a fraud a trillion miles away. By the way, friends, this was not a new concept for the Jews, okay? They knew this. They had been taught this their whole lives. You remember the story in 1 Samuel chapter 16? Where God had decided he needed a new king over the nation of Israel because the old king, King Saul, had become corrupt. His heart was not in a good place. And so God said, I'm done with Saul. And he told his prophet Samuel, he said, I've got a new king in mind for you. And I'm going to show you who that is. You remember that story? By the way, up to this point, up to Saul, and you can read in 1 Samuel chapter 9, that's the passage that tells that, how Saul became king. Up to this point in Israel's history, before Saul, they didn't even have a king. As a matter of fact, God was their king. Every once in a while, he would raise up a prophet or a judge to deal with his people, but God was their king. But the Israelites looked around to all the other nations. They're like, oh, look at that nation. They got this big, mighty king. They're so impressive. And look, they got a king too. And God, we want a king. They would cry out to God, give us a king. Give it. And we know what God said to them. God would say, listen, guys, calm down. Calm down. You don't want a king, because if you got a king, they're going to tax you. Your young men are going to go to war. Trust me, you don't want a king. And they get nagging and nagging. And finally, what did God say? Okay, fine. You want a king? I'll give you. And he gives into them, right? Parents, it's kind of like what we do with our kids with sleepovers, right? They come to us, oh, can we have a sleepover? I can so sleep over. We're like, I don't really. Why don't you just come have them play for a couple hours and we'll send them. No, please, a sleepover is so much more fun. And we're like, well, you don't really want to sleep over because here's what's going to happen. You're going to have this kid, they're going to sleep over. You're going to be up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning. You think you're having fun, but then you wake up the next day and you're tired and you're grumpy and you're getting in trouble and you're snapping at everybody. And then you end up getting consequences and you go to bed early. Trust me, you don't want to sleep over. It's not for your benefit or mine, right? And what do they do? Oh, please, please. So his parents are like, fine, we give in. You can have the sleepover. And that's kind of what God does. And he gives the Israelites a king. And by the way, 1 Samuel chapter 9 says Saul was the king. And it describes him as being a man of standing among all the other young men. It says he was literally a head taller than the other Israelites. He was the guy, when he walked into the room, people turned and looked. Like he had rock star appeal. He had we had movie star looks. He was chiseled and cut and massive and strong. And kids had posters of King Saul on their wall. Like he was unbelievable. He was impressive. He looked kingly. But very soon into his kingship, something happened to Saul. See, his heart became corrupt. He became so obsessed with his own kingship, so obsessed at how he appeared to other people on the outside. So obsessed about what other people thought of him. At one point, did you know Saul erected a statue a monument in his own honor? And so God gets to the point where he says, no, I'm done with you as king. Because you care about what others look at, and I care about what's going on inside of you. And so he says to Samuel, I've got a new king, and I want to show you who that new king is. So here's what he tells Samuel, I want you to go to the town of Bethlehem in 1 Samuel 16. My new king's there. And so Samuel gets up and he goes to Bethlehem. And when he gets there, God says, now I want you to go to the house of Jesse. And then I'll show you the king. And so he goes to the house of Jesse. And then he says, Samuel, here's what I want you to do. I want you to talk to Jesse and tell him to have all of his sons come out and offer a sacrifice. And one at a time, I want you to parade his kings out in front of you. And then I'll let you know which one of those dudes is the king, the next king of Israel. So Samuel obeys and tells Jesse. He goes out, he gets his sons. They all clean up. The sun's going down. There's a campfire going. Right? And Samuel's waiting out there on a stool. And all of a sudden, the firstborn comes out. His name's Eliab, right? And he starts marching out, and he stands in front of Samuel. Samuel's like, whoa, dude is all, like, this is the king. Look at him. Look at his biceps. Look at his pecs. Like, he is kingly. Thank you. And God cuts him off and says, no. I know you're impressed. That's not my guy. And so Samuel's thinking, well, if that's not the guy, I can't wait to see number 2, right? And so the second son comes out, right? Marches out, and Samuel's like, oh, man, he's pretty impressive too. This has got to be the guy, right? And God says, no, that's not the guy. 7 sons marched out in front of Samuel, friends. None of them were the king. And then Samuel's looking around thinking, like, that's it. That's all. Wait a sec, God, you were supposed to show, and that's it? And then he turns to Jesse and he says, Jesse, these are all the sons you have? And Jesse says, no, well, I guess there's one more. He's kind of the runt. He's the pretty boy playing in the field with the sheep. We just assumed it was good to leave him out there. And so David is the guy before Samuel, and God says, yep, Samuel, that's the guy. You should read it in 1 Samuel 16. Like Samuel's like, whoa, God. What about Eliab? What about him? And God says, listen, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. For I do not look at the things that you look at. Man looks at outward appearances, but God looks at the heart. David's my guy. You see, here's the problem for you and I in our culture. See, in our culture, we're just as obsessed as Samuel was with how things look on the outside. You think about it. In my neighborhood, I have this thing called the HOA. Now, maybe you do too. Here's how the HOA works. And by the way, we don't even get a pool out of this. How lame is that? So here's how the HOA works. What I do is monthly I send a bunch of money to the HOA, and in exchange, they send me nasty grams about my lawn, okay? That's our relationship. So if my grass is overcome with clovers, I get a letter from the HOA. If my grass is growing just a little bit too high, I get a letter from the HOA. If my kids happen to be running on the lawn and playing, which kids I thought were supposed to do, and they tear up the lawn, I get a letter from the HOA. Why? Because property value will go down. Because we're obsessed by how things appear on the outside. It's unbelievable. By the way, I discovered this phenomenon when I moved to Northern Virginia because I grew up on a small island in Canada. We didn't get out much, but what we did have is we had a lot of people that built brick homes, and they had a very functional purpose. Here's why people built brick homes. Because in the winter when it's cold, it's kind of like, it's more than just the 3 little pigs in the big bed. Like, it keeps your house warmer in the winter. It cuts down on your heating costs because it retains the heat better. In the summer, it has the opposite effect. It keeps the house cooler and cuts down on your cooling costs, so it has a very functional purpose. And then I moved to Northern Virginia. I remember driving around one day, and my friend, I stopped, I'm like, whoa, stop the car. He's like, what? And so I back up a little bit. I back up, like, look at that beautiful brick. And I'm like, looking on the side, like, dude, there's siding on the side of it. And I'm like, drive it forward. And I'm like, looking on there's siding. The sides and the back have no brick. It's pure. I know there are like elders in this church who are guilty of the brick front sin. Like, it is totally for cosmetic reasons, right? Like, it serves no purpose, but we're obsessed in our culture by how things appear on the outside. I don't know if this has happened to you. Have you ever left the grocery store and you walk up to your car and you see a brand new scratch or dent where somebody opened the door and it's stuck into the side of your car, and you're just like, I've seen Christians go nuts. Followers of Jesus explode. I'm going to find the video camera. I'm going to find this guy. We're going to hunt him down. We're going to get this guy once and for all, whoever it is, to my car. Like, the car works fine. It still gets you from point A to point B. but we're obsessed by what things look on the outside, right? Our hair starts turning gray. We start getting the highlights. Like we try to find the anti-oil of Olay. Like we are obsessed with how things look on the outside. We spend ridiculous amounts of money on clothing. Hey, let me ask you this. Why do you think people in Northern Virginia wear clothing? It's not to cover themselves, I promise you that, because if that were the motive, we would go to Goodwill or the Salvation Army where the clothing is the cheapest and we would buy just enough to keep us warm and covered. We wear what we wear because a magazine or a clothing company said, this is what looks good. And so we buy into it because we care about how things look on the outside. We're obsessed, friends. I'm telling you, we care more and stress more about what people think about us than whether or not they actually know us. And by the way, I haven't even scratched the surface of our obsession with how things look on the outside. I haven't mentioned facelifts and tummy tucks and breast implants and butt reductions. And I'm just as guilty as anyone. Well, not of those 4, but of the other ones. We have this rule, by the way, in our house. And when I say we have this rule, I mean I have this rule about how the kids are allowed to interact with me. Like, these are the things they can do to me. They can kick me, they can punch me, they can choke me, they can tackle me, they can climb on the banister of the stairwell and slam down on me as long as they don't touch my hair. If you mess with the hair, you mess with me. And so they know that, don't touch the hair. Because here's the deal. You have no clue what I have to go through to get it just the perfect amount of messy, not too messy, so that, like, you have no clue. I have this is a little bit of an infomercial. I have this product I use that's called It's Got to Be Glue. You can get it at your local grocery store, Target. It's in a yellow squeeze bottle. Oh my goodness. Go out and buy it today. Here's how bad it is. When I went to China a few weeks ago to kidnap my new son who's over here at the front, his name's Thaddeus. It's the equivalent, it's called gotcha moment. It's the equivalent of your birth moment. And so we go in there, and I go in there, and I get him, and they hand him my son. He's freaking out. I give him a little race car, and all of a sudden he calms down, and we're playing together. I'm signing paperwork. Within a half hour, before I gave him a hug, I had to race him off to the bathroom. I had brought with me a little tube of It's Got to Be Glue because I had to hook him up with his hair. Like, we're obsessed. We're obsessed with how things look on the outside, friends. And while we obsess and stress and pour all this time and effort to making sure our image, our appearance, our presentation to others of what the world we want them to see, God sees right through it all. He sees our heart. He knows our motives. He knows what we really care about. He knows how we treat the people around us. He knows what we think about them. He knows the stuff that we're ashamed of, the hidden stuff that we don't mention. He sees the presentation, the truth behind the presentation. He sees the truth behind the presentation. Friends, it's kind of like family photos, right? By the way, does anybody hate family photo sessions as much as me? Little amen, little hands up if that's you, and wives, don't hold your hands. Listen, they're awful. And we had one just the other day, and I'm convinced that 95% of the problem when we go for family photos is me. I owned that. 95% is probably mine. The other 195% are hers. And so we've got this, but we go to these family photos, right? And we have a photographer named Inga. She lives overseas. She flies in. And so when she's available, we do our pictures. She does a phenomenal job. She's unbelievable. And so we had just gotten back with Thaddeus. Emily had scheduled this long ago because she was in over. So we went to the Murrayfield Garden Center or whatever that place is, and to do these family photos. And you guys have probably, if you're following my wife on Facebook, you've probably seen the pictures, and you've probably said something like, "Oh, what a beautiful moment that must have been. They look so happy." We were not happy. When you have to say to your child, "Shut up and smile." Like, there's something wrong with that, right? Like, there's this one picture you've probably seen, because I've had a dozen people say to me, they've come up to me and they said, "Oh, that one picture where it's just the 5 girls, and like your big girls are like the bookends." You've seen it, right? The big girls are the bookends, and inside of them is Lily and Mackenzie, and inside of them is Thad, and then Lily's on one side, and she's kissing this cheek of Thad's, and Mac's on the other, and she's kissing this cheek. And then people think, "Oh, it's so sweet." Like, man, your children, look at how they love each other. You have no idea how much Thad wanted out of that picture. He wanted no business of having these two chicks licking his cheeks. And then Lily, right? Lily's sitting there, and then finally when it was done and we got the picture, and Thad no longer had to make out with her face. She's like, when the first thing you say after that is, can we send him back to China now, please? You understand when you look at a family photo, it may not be telling the whole story. They do love each other. The picture just is a lie. Anyways, we'll move on from that. But here's the deal. Here's what you learn from those experiences. We can look great on the outside. We can look happy. We can look successful. We can be doing and saying all the right things. We can have the nice house and the car. We can have pictures where husband and wife are smiling. We can look like our marriage is awesome. Our kids are under control. And when we come to church on Sunday morning, we worship, we sing, we say hi, we high five, and walk out this door. We can put on a show. We can put our check in the plate. We can do all the right things on the outside and still miss out on God's favor. Because God's favor is with the pure in heart. And it's time for you and I to start paying attention to what really matters, to stop worrying about and obsessing about what people think about how we present ourselves on the outside, and to become consumed with how God sees what's going on the inside. And here's why. It's because it's what the pure in heart receive. And consequently, what the not pure in heart don't receive. Because what's on the line in this text is your and my chance to see God. And remember, this is not a metaphor. It's not this idea where it's saying like, hey, you know what? If you don't sin, you don't screw up, like the greater your level of holiness, the greater spiritual clarity you have. No. Look at the context of all of the other promises and see what's on the line. The new heaven, the new earth, being comforted ultimately. That's what's on the line. You're not going to find a more powerful promise in a single verse in all of Scripture. So let's ask the second question. What was Jesus getting at when he said these pure in heart people get to see God? By the way, that expression, "will see God," was spoken by Jesus to a nation of people who lived under a king for generations, right? We talked about earlier. They lived under a monarch, and they were a nation of people surrounded by people who had kings or emperors like the Roman Empire. And here's what we learn, and here's what we know. Not just anyone can march right into the throne room and see the king. And we can't do that today. If you're frustrated with Barack Obama, you can't just open the White House gates, walk up the front door, knock on it, and go inside and say, hey, let's have a chat. I challenge you to try. You can't do it, right? Because not anyone can just march up and see the king. We learned that from the story of Esther. You remember in the Bible the story of Esther? Here's a gal who, there was a king in the land, and he was not a great king. Here's how we know. He was frustrated with his wife, and so he killed her. And he wanted a new wife, and so he had like this year-long beauty pageant. And he threw this big old beauty pageant, and Esther was a part of it. She was a Jew, and she won the lottery. She was selected as one of the new wives for the king. Right? He's got this harem, he's got other concubines, all this stuff, but Esther was selected as a wife. Well, there's this evil guy in the story, his name's Haman. And Haman has this anger at the Jews, and he comes up with this plot to have the king agree to kill off this nation, and the king has no idea that it's going on. And there's this guy in the story named Mordecai who's related to Esther, and Mordecai hears about Haman's plot, so he sends for Esther, and he sits her down and says, sweetheart, here's what I need you to do. I need you to go and talk to your husband, the king. You need to make him aware about what Haman's trying to do. And you remember what Esther says to him? Initially, he says, I would love to, but I can't do that. I don't care if I'm married to the king. Like, I can't just walk in and pray into his presence and go right before him, because what if he's in a bad mood? What if he doesn't want to hear or like what I have to say? What if I'm not his favorite wife? Like, when I walk in there, guess what he'll do? He'll kill me, because not just anyone gets to walk in and have a face-to-face with the king. So when Jesus said, the pure in heart will see God, he was saying loud and clear, if you want to find favor in the king's eyes, if you hope one day to stand before his throne, if you want to see God, you have to show yourself to be devoted to me, to be a follower who passionately pursues me. You need to show yourself to be a subject who is loyal to me in every way, because only those kind of followers, only people who were shown to be loyal in every way could go before the King. And only those people will get to see God. And maybe that's why Solomon said what he said in Proverbs 4:23 when he said, above all else, guard your heart, because everything you are flows from it. I don't know about you, but one day I want to see my King. One day I want to fall on my knees before His throne and just and pour out my thanks and honor and ascribe my glory to Him. I want to fall on my knees and worship my King. And so I want to know, what is this pure in heart thing? What do I have to do to get a pure heart? I was in Costco this past week. And when I was in Costco, I had Thaddeus with me. He was in the front cart part of the thing, and we're kind of wheeling up and down the lines, grabbing samples for lunch on the way, and going as fast as we can, because the faster you go in those big carts, the better. When all of a sudden we ran into this elderly lady from the church, not like we didn't take her out, like we saw her. And so we saw this elderly lady from the church that I was working at for like 8 years before here. Sweet lady. So we stopped, we talked, she gave me a hug, and she was asking about her family, and then she sees Thad, right? She goes, oh my goodness, I've seen the pictures of him. It's so cool to see him in person. And then she says to me, she said something that I've had a number of people since I've been home to China say to me. I'll tell you what that is in a minute, but here's why she said it. Because you guys know we brought Thad home because we fell in love with him, and we understood when we brought him home his heart condition was pretty severe. And we had seen what God has done in Lily, so I was like, hey, why not bring Thad? So we decided to bring Thad home because he was terminal in China. But we have the specialists, we have the best people in the world at Heart in DC for kids, and we can bring him home, and maybe as a chance. And so we go to China, we grab him, we bring him home, we're falling in love with him. He's an unbelievably cool kid. He's so funny. He's so sweet. And we had a doctor appointment the Wednesday after we got back. It was a week and a half ago. And they're going to do an echo just to kind of see the condition of his heart and determine what surgeries and what processes he needs to go through so that we can get this fix underway. And we sat in the doctor's office, post-surgery, or post-echo, post-blood draw, all that stuff. And the doctor said to us, fighting the tears in his eyes, I'm sorry, but there's nothing surgically we can do for your boy. And I remember sitting there and I'm freaking out. And I'm thinking no, you don't, he's two. So that's something you say about grandparents. That's something you say about people that are 90. They're sorry, there's nothing like, you don't say that about a 2-year-old boy. You've got this wrong. In my head, that's what I'm thinking. And I'm listening to him talk about the fact that for this kid, and he said our goal is going to be, there are maybe a few small procedures we can do in the cath lab where we can get him a little more oxygen, that kind of stuff, make him a little more comfortable. But he said that's exactly what our goal will be for him. To try to make him as comfortable as we can. We don't know if he has 2 years or what he has. And I remember sitting there going, no. I remember, and Dryden's in the room and we talked this morning. I remember for months leading up to this, Dryden would tell all her friends, I'm going to be the one who's going to teach him how to play sports. Because I want him to be the best sport player in his team. I want to teach him how to play sports, and he'll never get to do that stuff. He walks 20 feet across the room and he turns so blue it's scary, and he gasps for breath. He has to stop himself ever. His heart is that bad. And boy, I'm telling you, we're going to enjoy the heck out of him. And we're going to have a good time with him. But as a parent, you're seeing that, and I'm wrestling with it on so many levels. I'm like, he's going to look out the window. He's going to watch all these other kids doing these boy things he's never going to get to do. And we'll do as much as we can, but it just rips your heart out as a father. You have dreams of doing certain kind of things with your kids, and you're never going to have those selfishly. It just annihilates you. And so as a parent, Emily and I are just decimated by this, but at the same time, we're thrilled. We're thrilled to death that, man, he's got a place to experience love. He's got a place where he can laugh. He's got a place where he can fall and make mistakes and be teased by his sisters and mess them up, which he's doing. It's awesome. But we were in Costco, and this lady said to me, she looked at him, she said, he's so handsome. He's so cute. He's so adorable. He looks so healthy on the outside. I can't believe he's so sick on the inside. I know there are people in this room that describes who you are to a T. You're healthy looking on the outside. You come here on Sunday mornings, it's like you got everything together. You got the nice house, you got the nice cars, you go on the nice vacations, you got the family photos. You come in here, you worship, you do whatever, you have those conversations, but you know that silently, you may not tell people that there's depression that's eating you alive, or there's anger at somebody that's tearing up your heart, or that there's some kind of a sin that you're not saying that's destroying you. And all we get sometimes is the presentation of who you are. You look wonderful on the outside, but inside you're spiritually hollow and weak. Friends, I've been there, and I know what it's like to live that presentation. Here's the reality. If that's you, you cannot fix your own heart. Can't do it. We learned that the hard way with Lily. We brought her home. They told us this surgery will fix her. She had the surgery, and we thought she was doing okay. And then finally, we learned that, you know what? Her heart rejected the fix, which launched her into surgery after surgery and heart cath after heart cath and medicine after medicine. And none of those surgeries worked. None of the fixes we tried worked. And finally, the doctors, after 2 years, and almost 2 years, half of that time, Emily living at the hospital, finally they sit us down and they say, you know what? Here's the deal. Her old heart is dying. There's nothing we can do. She needs a new heart. And so we listed her for the heart transplant, the whole deal. Well, friends, there's a lot of you that have went down that road. You've tried fix after fix after fix. You've tried self-help books. You've tried counseling. You've tried leaving that relationship and going into a new relationship. You've left an old job that was tearing you down behind. And you have no idea that there's nothing you can do on the outside to change your own heart. You can't just change your habits. You can't just change the circumstances and change your heart. It doesn't work that way. See, the Bible teaches that sin not only separates us from God, sin is also a sickness. And it makes us sick. And so when we become sick with sin, we have a diseased heart. And the only way to take care of that is to get a new heart. It means a trip to the great physician. And you watch, if you were to come to our house now and you were to watch, because Lily has a new heart. After a new heart, 3 months in the ICU, she finally flipped a switch. She almost died so many times in the ICU, it was ridiculous. But one day, just like that, it was like something changed. And now if you come home and watch her, she had a doctor appointment this past week, and the doctors they couldn't believe their eyes. They're like, she's running, she's dancing, she's clapping, she's singing, she's got this new energy, she's growing into a beautiful, annoying girl, and it's so unbelievable, we love it. She's a new person. And what God is saying is this: you need to become a new person. That happens in Jesus Christ. And there's only one way to get that heart, and that's to surrender your life to Jesus Christ, and He gives it freely to you. Blessed are the pure in heart. But then what? For those of you who follow in Jesus Christ, here's what you need to do. You need to begin the process then of guarding that heart. Because you can't take part in the old behaviors. You can't keep making the same old choices. You can't keep acting the same way you did before, saying the same things, doing the same things, because that new heart can become diseased and sick and corrupt. So you have to guard. We learned with Lily's going to be on anti-rejection medicine her whole life. There'll be heart caths and treatments and blood draws and medicines. And there are foods that she could eat before that she can't eat now because we've got to guard her heart. The same thing happens with us in Christ, friends. That's why we worship on Sunday mornings. We're impressing God. We worship because it's a way for God to carve and design and guard our heart. That's why home groups. Because there's a chance for us to surround ourselves with people who love us and hold us accountable. That's why we do Bible study, because it guards our heart. That's why we pray. It guards our heart. Because on that day, when you get your end of the life report card, there is one thing He looks at, and it's this: blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Will you pray with me? Father in heaven, we love You so much. Thank You for what You're doing in the lives of everyone here. Father, thank You for Your Son. Thank You for the great physician. Thank You for the one that can take this horrible mess. Father, I thank You that seeing You has nothing to do with how perfect I am. I thank You so much for that, because I am so far from perfect, and so is everyone in this room. Father, I pray for someone here who's never made the decision to accept Christ and get that new heart and begin following you. I pray that you stir them, that they run to one of the pastors afterwards or one of a friend and share that decision. And for everyone in here, Father, I pray that you show them what they need to do to guard their heart, because blessed in the pure in heart, you said, for we see God. We thank you for this morning, and we love you.